Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this beautiful fall evening. As a way of getting started, I'd like to introduce Elder Marie, who's going to welcome everyone to her traditional lands. Marie Hooper is an elder woman from Coquitlam First Nation. She recently moved to her home community to better connect with her Indigenous culture. She keeps her knowledge of the history of the nations and its families. This is passed down from her ancestors, grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousin, and mother, who is 96 years old, and all of whom have lived on the reserve lands and territories. Marie, who was born in the UK, immigrated to Vancouver in 1967. Her background is Coast Salish, English, Scottish, and Portuguese. Marie has studied at BC Institute of Technology, University. Her qualifications include Indigenous Environmental Archaeology, Ecological Engineering, and Guardian of the Indigenous Lands and Territories. Marie is a mother of 4 and grandmother of 9. Her passion is to bring residential awareness into the school system or wherever she can bring up the subject, asking individuals, what do you know about residential schools? Being born in the UK and recently reconnecting with her culture and community prevented her learning about residential schools. Learning and sharing the truth and bringing awareness helped Marie process the trauma her family and others have endured. And we're so grateful that Elder Marie can be here to welcome us and welcome all of you for this event. So without further ado, thank you, Elder Marie.
At this time, I'd like to say a short prayer. Creator Lord, protect all that are here tonight. Bless all that enter through these doors of SFU today and future days. Lord, hear our prayers. Our world is in turmoil. Bring compassion, love, and understanding. Bring calm, bring peace for all that are here tonight and around the world. Guide us on our journeys. Amen. Good evening. Welcome all to Vancouver campus. My name is Marie Hooper, member, elder of the Coquitlam First Nation. I respectfully acknowledge that we are on the unceded Coast Salish territory, the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Coquitlam, Katzie, Tsleil-Waututh Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their past, present, and future elders. I express my deepest gratitude to care for and teachings about our Mother Earth and our relations. May we continue to honor these teachings, First Nations teachings, which we are all learning. I'd like to extend my special thanks to all in attendance here tonight. A small part cultivating strong relationships with First Nations people, with all cultures here in Canada and around the world. First Nations believe, they say, Lotsama, one heart, one mind. Heichka, thank you.
Thank you very much, Elder Marie. Thank you for the prayer and for the welcome. especially this week for National Reconciliation Week. May we all, especially those of us that are settlers, reflect on our role in processes of ongoing reconciliation, efforts to return land back to Indigenous peoples. So Elder Marie, distinguished speakers, friends, colleagues, family, students, and members of the community, good evening. My name is Megan McKenzie, and I'm the director of the School for International Studies here at SFU. And this event tonight brings so many firsts. For many of us, it's the first event of this size in a long time. It's the first event for the school for at least 2 years. And it's the inaugural Andrew Mack Lecture. So we're so delighted that you can join us for this special evening. So on behalf of the School for International Studies and the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, who is also co-sponsoring this event, I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural Andrew Mack Lecture given by Lotfullah Najafizada. So before we get started, I'd like to say a few words about the school and the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, tell you a bit about Andrew Mack and the Andrew Mack lecture series that was initiated in his memory, and then introduce Dr. Mawani, who will introduce our speaker. So as I mentioned, this event is co-hosted by the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies and the School for International Studies at SFU. The Center for Comparative Muslim Studies fosters academic and public discussion and understanding of Muslim societies and cultures. It shifts the analysis from the notion of a single religious landscape defined by the religion of Islam to that of Muslims of different experiences, interpretations, as agents in the construction of their societies and cultures. The School for International Studies, which I'm a member of, offers interdisciplinary research and teaching on international affairs. Essentially, our school was established with the understanding that the most effective way to understand global problems is to examine them from multiple perspectives. And the best way to solve global problems is to initiate solutions that draw from multiple disciplines and fields of study. Our amazing faculty members include world-leading experts in their areas and draw on the disciplines of economics, comparative politics and international relations, history, sociology, and anthropology. The school is really interested in the interconnected areas of peace and security, international development, human rights and international law, and governance and civil society. So, as Elder Marie said, this is a tumultuous time, and I think in this moment of history, the school's ethos is perhaps more valuable than ever. With global pandemics, war, climate change, these are all multifaceted problems that require the types of interdisciplinary training and critical thinking that we provide to our incredible students. We also, I have to say, have incredible staff, including those that helped organize this event. And I want to say a particular thanks to those that you met when you were checking in, especially Ellen Yap and Kaylin Barrett, who none of these kinds of events happen seamlessly without really amazing professional staff. So thank you to our entire team. So again, this is the inaugural lecture of the Andrew Mack Memorial Series. And I just want to say a few words about Professor Mack, his role in the school, and why we've initiated a lecture series in his honor. So Andrew Mack, always Andy to his many friends across the world, passed away in Vancouver on January 20th, 2021, at the height of the pandemic, before anyone was vaccinated. He had been an adjunct professor in the School for International Studies at SFU almost from its foundation, having brought his internationally funded Human Security Report project to the school and the university early in 2007. Andrew started the Human Security Report project following his service from 1998 to 2001 as director of the Strategic Planning Office in the Executive Office of UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. He'd become convinced that the UN and international community generally lacked adequate and reliable information on trends in global warfare. So how could the UN determine whether its efforts in conflict prevention and peacebuilding were at all effective without any baseline data? The Human Security Report Project set out to fill the knowledge gaps, working closely with the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, the Uppsala Conflict Data Program. Andrew's passion, apart from peace research, was sailing. He twice sailed single-handedly between Australia and New Zealand, and later explored the coasts of BC along with his wife, Laura. So in consultation with his loving wife, Laura, who really wanted to be here this evening, and unfortunately was unable to attend, we decided to honor Andy with a lecture series in his name featuring experts on human security. If you're interested in donating to this fund or supporting future lectures or watching future lectures, there's flyers out front. You can scan the QR code to be connected to that. I can't think of a better person to give the inaugural lecture this evening, and I'm honored to call on Dr. Mawani, who will introduce the speaker. I'll just say a few words about Dr. Mawani, who's going to introduce our speaker. Dr. Mawani has held senior leadership positions in legal and regulatory institutions and has a distinguished record of service as a leader, diplomat, and volunteer. Building on her legal career in the UK and Canada, Dr. Mawani served as chair and CEO of the Immigration and Refugee Board, and then as commissioner of the Public Service Commission of Canada. She served as advisor on diversity to the Canadian School of Public Service. Between 2005 and 2019, she served as diplomatic representative of the Aga Khan Development Network, first to the Kyrgyz Republic and subsequently to the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. She's received numerous awards for her contributions to the public service and advancement of women, including the Order of Canada and the Public Service of Canada Outstanding Achievement Award. She also happens to be an honorary degree recipient from SFU, which we're so delighted. And we're so delighted that she's been very essential to planning this event and very passionate about Lotfullah's work. So I'd like to call you up. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Most important, your bio. So good evening, everybody. Bonjour, bonsoir, and salamu alaikum. First of all, thank you very much, Megan, for your introduction and for welcoming us here so warmly today. And I want to take a minute to thank you, Elder Marie, for that very beautiful and moving prayer and blessing. And I think that what you said about your prayer for peace and calm is, for all the reasons we know, so timely and so vital today in every context. And thank you also for, your land acknowledgement. I often feel that we mustn't ever come to the point where we do a land acknowledgement because we want to tick a box. It is because it has to be meaningful that we understand why the land acknowledgement is important. And I think what you said today and the reminders that we must get for those of us who may not be as conversant with it. We may have come from many other countries and we have come here and we're trying to learn also about the indigenous people's experience. So thank you for that. I'm very honored to be here to introduce Lotfullah, and doubly honored because it is marking the Andrew Mack memorial, but inaugural lecture of this series. And as you said, Megan, who better than Lotfullah to start this? So, I'm really honored that I'm able to be here with you today. I had made some notes as to what I was going to say, but some conversations around while we were having this lovely food sort of brought a few more things to my mind. And then also the fact that this is the Andrew Mack inaugural memorial lecture, and Andrew Mack's legacy which was this very important human security report project, but not just because it was a human security report project, but because we didn't have, he knew and said that there was not proper data. And without that, how do you engage in even peace processes? Those of us who have followed and been involved in any peace processes know that it's not very effective in those circumstances. So I want to, 2 or 3 points that I'd like to make. One is that we mustn't forget Afghanistan. And your presence here today, I think, is very, very reinforcing and very encouraging. You certainly have not forgotten Afghanistan. That's why you're here. And for that, thank you. But I think we all need to do a lot more work to remind a wider group of people that Afghanistan matters, including our governments. Because the reality is that not that people don't care, but it is because, as somebody was saying over our drink of water, was that there is some fatigue. And then we described, I think it was Lee who described news journalists in the media as also news warriors. And so you as warriors, those of you who are in the media here, take on a role and then also and help to shape our opinions about what is happening. So factual information is so, and reliable information and timely information is so critical, as we know. But the reality is that crisis seems to just one after another, and then our news warriors shift also because they are covering many other crises. And so things slip off, and we feel, many of us feel, that Afghanistan has sort of slipped off that radar, and other priorities and other have come in. So part of the role today, so thank you, Megan, also for giving this opportunity so that Afghanistan does not fall off the radar. There are so many reasons for that. I mean, I'm not going to talk about the pragmatic reason about counterterrorism and human security, because I think everybody knows that. But I think much more important to all of us here, I hope, is the fact that there has been a major transformation in Afghanistan in the last 20 years, a transformation that we must not forget. And those of us who have had the honor to be in that country I was there for 7 years on the ground, and would certainly be able to speak to that transformation, and many others who have worked for a long time. Transformation, what sort of transformation? Transformation in the growth and the development of civil society. To me, that will be one of the key things. In empowerment of women, in girls' education, but the general overall empowerment of women, and an independent media, which was very, very critical as part of the development of civil society. Human rights activists, women judges, women parliamentarians. I mean, I think there is not one area, sports, we have not one area where we have not had a transformation in which youth and women were participating. So I think that's been, and then of course on the political scene, etc. So I think Afghanistan has changed. I could speak about the change in Afghanistan from a community level, because that's where I was traveling and meeting communities, and what was important for them, what was in their mind. And can I tell you that when I was in a province of Badakhshan, and I went into a microfinance bank, and the women were there. They were in full burqa, and I had a chance to talk to them, and I saw that they were depositing some funds, and I talked to them, and I said, "So what are you saving for?" And every single one of them said to me, "For my children's education." So education. I mean, that's the universal passport. And that's where, when that gets denied, it's a huge, huge denial in so many ways. So we are at SFU. Isn't that amazing too, that we are talking about this at this time? So that, I would say that there has been a transformation that cannot be put back. But what we worry about, and there is so much advocacy going on, and that transformation has meant that Afghans who are outside the country, They are vigorously working. There's so many in this room here that if I single you out, I will leave somebody out, and I don't want to do that, but to say to all of you. And then there are also Afghans in the country. Lotfullah may be able to speak to you about what is it that the Taliban is most afraid of today. I was very struck by that, and I leave him to tell you that. And so we need to continue. And I would submit that the big risk is that the humanitarian crisis that is facing Afghanistan is if we don't pay attention to that, it's the worst humanitarian crisis. And if we don't pay attention to that and we remain focused on one or two areas, which, I mean, we must do also, we are going to lose everything. That is, I think, the very big risk. And maybe at the end I could, just as I introduced Lotfullah, I just want to go back to an incident 4 years ago. 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago, a vehicle carrying Lotfullah's colleagues from Tolo News, from the newsroom, that vehicle was attacked, September 2018. And it was a targeted attack and on journalists, and 8 journalists of Lotfullah's team lost their lives. Now, that is the sad, very tragic part of the story. But I remember going to the newsroom to pay my condolences and respect. And you know, it was a very somber moment, as you can imagine. All your team and you were, everybody was stunned, everybody was in shock. But you know what really struck me was the resolve that these lives were not going to be in vain. It was to honor them, and it was to continue. And so when we talk about, legendary Afghan resilience, I would add to that it's not only resilience, but it is also, I want to be careful about the word because it's really important, that it's about resistance. And what you are doing, Lotfullah, and so many of you in this room, and those who are not in this room, Afghans are doing, is that you are demonstrating resistance. So maybe on that note, and what is the resistance that here we are talking about? It's the resistance of setting up a media network, an online and a media network which is going to be connected to the diaspora, the journalists in the diaspora. But importantly for me, because we know so many of the journalists on the ground, that you are, through this, being able to get the news to not only to us, but also to Afghans in the country. So AMU Television, which you have launched, thank you, and to all of the other journalists who are here. So I may go on to introduce you formally. I've known Lotfullah since 2013 when I went to Afghanistan. He's, as you know, I'm sure, have many of you read his bio that was sent out? So I'll pick up, okay, so I'll maybe, with your permission, pick out some of the key elements of that. So Lotfullah was the director of Tolo News. I would say that he was a household name and face and voice, actually, in Afghanistan, throughout my time there, which was 7 years, but I know much longer than that. And so, but in addition to overseeing the largest news operation in the country, Lotfullah carried out many high-profile interviews with global leaders, several that are in the list here, which I won't go through, but take it from me, they were all global leaders. And also, I thought what was very interesting and important was that you hosted Afghanistan's only presidential debate, and that was in 2018. And on World Freedom Press Day, Megan was talking about awards I received, but there is a very long list of awards Lotfullah has received. But I mean, I think on World Press Freedom Day, Paris-based Reporters Without Borders awarded him the prestigious Medal of Press Freedom Hero. We talked about warriors and heroes for journalists, and that was the fight for free press in Afghanistan. Time magazine has profiled him as the next generation global leader. Forbes magazine has selected him among the under 30 Asia influences in the media, named as Journalist of the Year by One World. The most recent, you were in Manchester, England, to receive that award. And probably one more thing, that Lotfullah was the only Afghan journalist who attended 2 rounds of the civil society talks with the Taliban in Doha, 2019, and then in Oslo, 2022. And actually, he just came back from another round of talks in Vienna. Maybe he'll tell you more about that. And is a Pritzker Fellow at the Institute of Politics, University of Chicago, offering seminars, a visiting scholar, former fellow of the Asia Society Rumsfeld Foundation, Atlantic Council, World Press Institute, and most importantly, we know his whole family, and his wonderful wife, Farida, and their 2 young children. So on that, I'm very pleased to introduce Lotfullah.
Nurjehan, the under 30 award was a long time ago. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Nurjehan, for the introduction. It's great to be here, and this is a magnificent view. And I'm enjoying my time in Vancouver, and it's an honor to be here today. And thank you, SFU, for hosting me today to discuss Afghanistan, a land that owns my body and soul. And most importantly, to discuss Afghanistan from a human security perspective. In other words, we're talking about the people of Afghanistan, finally. The people are often neglected in some strategic conversations, in our world in particular. We believe that people of Afghanistan have been neglected throughout our history. In the past 4 decades, in particular, in the past 4 decades of armed conflict, triggered mostly by national and group interests, foreign and domestic. In the case of national security, threats are mainly perceived as external challenges to nations' sovereignty, which in turn is largely based on the integrity of its geographical whole. It overwhelms and marginalizes all other critical human-centric securities. These include food for your family, adequate shelter, good health, schooling for your children, protection from violence, and freedom from pervasive threats to people's rights and safety. Their ability, that is, to live a life free of fear. From a human security perspective, human beings are the primary reference, not the state. Citizens' insecurities have been often neglected, sacrificed by the state or groups in the name of larger security, military, ethnic, language, and group interests. Afghanistan is a unique case, though, and I'll explain. It's where human security, as well as national security and sovereignty, have been absent altogether, and that for so long. As we speak, we're the only country on earth that's not recognized by any country in the world, friends and foes. That is a clear vacuum of order. It has also affected the situation of nearly 40 million people in Afghanistan. In Bonn, Germany, 2001, the international community, after a decade of abandonment, abandoning Afghanistan that resulted in disastrous tragedy of 9/11, reconvened. They founded Afghanistan's citizen-centric modern system to be achieved through elections. The people's will. One man, one vote. One woman, one vote. The intentions were right. It was the first attempt in the history of Afghanistan to give birth to a state that puts citizens' interests at the forefront. But the formula seemed to be wrong. Power was distributed based on who had more guns and who had controlled more territory. It was a marriage between Afghanistan's traditional and tribal politics with ambitious values of modern nation-state. In the past 20 years, we realized that the two had hardly reconciled. In other words, the lesson we learned from Afghanistan is that you cannot be half democratic. You're either a democracy or you're not. Afghanistan's ethnic powerhouses, under influence of enormous international presence, acted as democrats. The incentives were too high for them to put democracy on their faces, but not enough to put democracy in their hearts and minds. To fast-track democratic process in Afghanistan and to simplify politics, power brokers were empowered, ethnic leaders were emboldened. The Afghan version of democracy was born. To accept everyone as citizen, but not necessarily as equal. There were unwritten laws and traditions accepted in Afghanistan version of democracy that had put price tags on people and ethnic groups. That also included women as low-level citizens. No women were even considered, for instance, to become a security minister, a finance minister, or any key decision maker at the top of the government. The reason I say is that citizens' interest, human security, wasn't part of Afghanistan's formula for peace from day one. The people of Afghanistan, however, proved to be Democrats at heart. Afghanistan is an old country. It has been there for thousands of years. But it has a very young population. The median age is 18, 2/3 of the population under the age of 25. Meaning that 20 years after Bonn, Afghanistan had a different population, a different look and feel, a different dream. This population was largely ignored in the Doha deal 20 years later. Neither Bonn nor Doha were based on ground realities of the country. They were an attempt to manage the situation in Afghanistan, not to fix them. In Doha, probably the only peace attempt in the world that had no place for referendum, people's participation, and inclusion of victims. It was a fast track of achieving a political settlement. The people had successes, though, in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. They had chosen a clear path. I have seen no survey in the past few years, including some after the Taliban takeover in 2021, that puts approval rating of democracy and elections below 75%. And the Taliban's approval rating has never exceeded 50%, including now. Despite mistakes in Bonn, pumping $2 trillion in Afghanistan and 1 million tours of only US soldiers in the country, without a consistent strategy, or strategies influenced by domestic politics, Afghanistan did not remain the same. Nurjehan, as you said, a profound social transformation happened. We won our first Olympic medal. Our girls' robotics team won tournaments around the world. The students from our children's music school played from Opera House in Sydney to Kennedy Center in Washington. Our media became freest in the entire region. First, Afghan girls went to Oxford and Harvard and so on. Afghan female parliamentarian topped all candidates, including powerful male contenders in the remotest province of the country. The people, as I said, had chosen their path. Politics did not walk along in the name, again, of national and group interests. As the region harbored isolated and regrouped Taliban remnants, they took the benefit of the same flawed political formula, coupled with corruption and incompetence in Kabul and mistakes of the international community, including, for instance, civilian casualties. Taliban became a fundamental challenge to Afghanistan's road to prosperity. The political culture in Kabul, founded and nurtured by the West, became too dependent on the international community, which over time, it became too much to handle and gave birth to another rushed policy of reconciliation with the Taliban in 2018. It was another attempt for another flawed marriage. It was known to many from the outset that the objectives outlined were far stretched. Doha made the Taliban look like a political group. It did not change the Taliban from a military group, from an armed group, to a political group. With the disgraceful departure of the last Afghan president from Kabul on August 15, the Taliban found an excuse to dismiss all commitments made in Doha for a political settlement. For them, it was a military takeover. For them, it was a winner-take-all situation. Today, our Olympic medalists are refugees. Our robotic teams is fragmented and found their ways in different corners of the world. So did our young musicians. Their school is closed. Girls' schools above the grade of 6 are closed. We're talking about 3 million kids and teenage girls who are facing a very dark future. Our media dropped from 122 to 156 on the World Press Freedom Index in just 1 year. The list is long. Why? The Taliban, the current ruler, have failed to demonstrate a vision for the country, even a Taliban vision for the country. It seems that there is a state of anarchy in Afghanistan. Many argue that Taliban 2.0 doesn't exist. If they transform, that's the end of the Taliban. They know it, and they know what they stand for. The group has yet to establish a formal governance structure. The emirate is organized around a supreme leader, the emir, believed to be endowed by God with the authority to oversee all affairs of state and society. For the first 6 months of their rule, it appeared as if the Taliban cabinet, chaired by a symbolic prime minister, would shape governance policies. But ministers have been increasingly overruled on issues large and small by the emir, who is based in Kandahar. This dynamic came into public view on March 23rd this year, when the long-promised return of girls to high school was overruled by the emir at the last minute. Power structure within the Taliban, South and East, Pashtun and non-Pashtun, young leaders and traditional leaders, make us wonder how the group will unite even to rule Afghanistan long term. One group of the Taliban is sending 17,000 fighters in one valley, resisting the Taliban rule, while other groups communicate with the same resistant fighters that they are not part of that war. We know the Taliban in the last year, in the last 1 year, far better than we had known of the group in the past 20 years combined. They are exposed. Their strengths are exposed. Their weaknesses are exposed. Their divisions, their differences, their ties with the countries in the region and beyond are exposed. The Taliban have failed to commit to the basic fundamentals of citizen-centric constitutional order Afghanistan. The people are suffering. Not that Afghanistan was a paradise before August 15 last year. Our suffering is what defines us and connects us for over 4 decades. But today, it's at a whole different level. Acute malnutrition is now entrenched across the country. Over 90% of households have not been able to get enough food in the past year. Almost 20 million people, half of the population, are suffering either level 3, which is crisis, or level 4, which is emergency, levels of food insecurity, as reported by the World Food Programme. In Ghor, in central Afghanistan, tens of thousands of people surveyed by the UN have slipped into catastrophic level 5 malnutrition, which is a precursor to famine. Afghanistan continues facing the highest frequency of insufficient food consumption globally. The world has committed around $2 billion in the past year, more than half coming only from the United States, to respond to the situation. It's like a Band-Aid. The UN is asking for twice of the amount of aid for next year unless the economy picks up. As an aid-dependent country for so long, we know it's never the solution. None of us, the whole world, should have the courage to look at the Afghan women, 20 million of them, in the eyes. They're going through so much, and it's the worst place to be a woman in the 21st century. Many are sent home from work. The schools are closed with no clarity when they will reopen. And travel restrictions are in place. And many of us could not even think of some of these restrictions that could happen. We're not even talking about the right of assembly, protest, freedom of speech, political participation of women in the country. These are now rich people's problems. The Taliban have waged a war on the women of Afghanistan because they were the cornerstone of the social transformation that we talked about earlier. They are the biggest threat to ideologies taking Afghanistan back to the Stone Age. I see colleagues here from the media family. We have over 100 cases of tortures and arrests of journalists in the past year alone. 85% of Afghan female journalists have disappeared. It was reported just yesterday that there is no single female journalist in 17 provinces of the country. That is half of Afghanistan, more than half of Afghanistan. The industry was once a thriving one, with over 10,000 members. We were producing 200 hours of political and social programs in every 24 hours. And that provided uncensored and parallel platform for Afghans of all walks of life to express their views and speak up. A senior Afghan colleague of mine was questioned yesterday in Kabul that why a female commentator had appeared on a show without a face cover. On the regional level, including those countries who were pleased to see the departure of Western forces are finding themselves in a difficult situation, questioning whether the Taliban are material for any strategic engagement. I think some countries in the region are beginning to engage with non-Taliban Afghans as a sign of disappointment in decisions made in Kandahar and in Kabul. The West seems to believe right now in transactional engagement with the Taliban rather than a strategic and profound engagement. A status quo might serve short-term objectives better. The three objectives of the West in Afghanistan right now include counterterrorism, safe passage for Afghans at risk, and humanitarian assistance. For broader changes in Afghanistan, I often found the West's strategy for Afghanistan based purely on hope. The lesson we should learn from 20 years of engagement in Afghanistan is, first, we should have a long-term vision. As one put it rightly, the West had 20 annual strategies for Afghanistan rather than one strategy for 20 years. Afghanistan has been suffering from short-sightedness of politics for so long. Second, we should have partnered with the people of Afghanistan rather than a handful of politicians who did not believe in the cause from day one. And third, we should have engaged with the region in a way that they had not felt isolated and humiliated. They should have been part of the problem, the solution, not the problem. A country, Afghanistan, that has seen 7 political systems in just half a century. From monarchy to communism, to no government, to civil war, to Taliban 1, to democracy, and now to Taliban 2. It teaches us one thing. We learn that the status quo won't prevail. It's time, in my view, for reflection and for a strategic engagement for Afghanistan. Abandonment did not produce the results. So did the excessive engagement in the past 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're all reminded this evening how wonderful it is to be together and to hear such a wonderful public speaker. And I know, I also want to acknowledge that there are so many people in the room for whom this is such a personal subject. And Lotfullah, you did such a wonderful job taking us through the politics and centering the human experience, or reminding us, thinking about the robotics team, but also thinking about 21-year plans. And so thank you for such a comprehensive and incredible lecture. We do have some time for question and answer, and I would just ask, with all the generosity I have in my heart, that out of respect for our speaker and for the audience, that you wait until you have a concise question or comment before you raise your hand, and we're very happy to have them. But we can also chat afterwards. So if you need a moment to gather your thoughts, that's absolutely fine. If you're ready to ask a question, please come on up. There's a mic just in the middle if you want to take yourself. Yes, yeah, just so everyone can hear.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Arredondo. I'm the Consul General of Argentina here in Vancouver. I want to thank our speaker for this wonderful presentation, very touching and moving. And coming from the other extreme of the world, I was wondering, how would you suggest us, or how would you expect the rest of the world to engage and help Afghanistan to overcome the situation that you just narrated? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think the engagement of the world with Afghanistan shouldn't be black and white. I think that was the essence of my message. It shouldn't be only with the Taliban, or it shouldn't be to abandon Afghanistan because sometimes it's too much, or to take over Afghanistan because you want to handle it from A to Z. I think it's time for us to reflect on what went wrong. A lot went wrong. We Afghans are good at blaming others, but we should blame ourselves too. A lot went wrong. I think two key things that disappeared in Afghanistan and the Afghan societies were ownership and leadership. We lost ownership and leadership of our affairs. I think it's time for us to resume that and engage with the world, which should be reciprocated. I think it has to be calculated. I'm not advocating for abandonment of Afghanistan, nor I'm advocating for recognition of the Taliban. I think it's important for us to understand what kind of engagement we want with that country. Thank you.
Thank you. You can understand that the West, since what happened in Afghanistan last year, has been very reluctant to recognize the government of Afghanistan. But in not recognizing the government, it has meant that there is this amazing humanitarian crisis going on there for which no aid is forthcoming. So what would be your recommendation or solution for how the governments in the West and the peoples of the West can actually help the peoples of Afghanistan if there is no recognition of the government happening? How do we get that aid and help across?
Thank you. There is an unwritten, undeclared consensus in the region, first, Afghanistan's immediate neighbors, not to recognize the Taliban. There were attempts by China, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan to do that three months ago, but they walked back because other countries in the region protested. I think after Zawahiri's killing, Taliban's recognition by the international community is a very long shot. There are serious questions about presence of international terrorists in that country. So, if we can't recognize the Taliban, but people are in need, what are the options? I think right now, the United Nations is the primary distributor of aid in that country. It's not a perfect solution. We know the bureaucracy of the UN. But that's how support has been channeled to Afghanistan in the past 1 year. They asked for $2.4 billion in London in January. They got almost about $2 billion. they're asking for double of that amount for next year. Is there an appetite in the world to give $4 billion to Afghanistan per year and then increasing every year? I don't see that, with so many challenges popping up around the world. But the money that is being given to Afghanistan, I think that has to be spent so wisely that we can go through this period. I don't think that the Taliban need Western money. They live as an insurgent group with very minimal resources. They run a government. They run customs. And only the Ministry of Mines of the Taliban in the past month earned $4.3 million. So I think it's important to ensure that the money does not go to the Taliban. I don't think they need it. They would certainly appreciate it. They're asking for it. But I don't think that the money should go to them. The money has to be given to any institution in the country with the capacity to help Afghans directly, including the Aga Khan Network, for instance. That's just one example. Doing a lot of grassroots work in rural Afghanistan, including Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. When I was a child, the water pump next to our mosque was built by the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. So we're known to situations like this. I think that's the route that the international community, the Western Bloc, is assuming for now. How politics will allow this to change and transform in the coming a year or two, I think that remains to be seen.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your courage to share your story. I am referring to my experience during the 70s. The focus was yet Vietnam, and the Vietnamese people won the war. And it seems like they had the support from the neighboring countries to rebuild. But in your case, the neighboring countries are not forwarding as much as they should help rebuild the country. But my question is about how do people inside look at themselves in terms of survival? Because in Africa also, it's a continent which is almost forgotten, except for military aid and different kind of mining and so on. But there is always a grassroots situation where people survive because, so I don't know if you can share some of the stories of people surviving on a daily to day, and also whether Afghanistan wants to be whether it should look like another Vietnam or another, taking modernism in the way the Western modernism are, because it's not going to work, because all the models of education and so on seems to be very Eurocentric. And I was wondering if Asia-centric models of development are coming in. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had our Saigon moment last year, and that was disastrous. I think we're still trying to recover from incidents of just 100 days that transformed Afghanistan. The region, you rightly said, is lacking consensus on which direction Afghanistan should go. They are still dealing with Afghanistan as a country that relied so much on the West and ignored all its relationship with regional powers. I think we're paying the price. We've been paying the price for that in the past 20 years, and we're paying the price for that now. Even for the Taliban, as rulers of Afghanistan today, they have a hard choice. They go to the region, they're going to lose the West. They get close to the West, they're going to lose the region. I think that's one balance that needs to be understood. Second is the power play within the region. India and Pakistan do not look eye to eye when it comes to how to fight terrorism in South Asia. And inside Afghanistan, you have all sorts of those terrorist groups. Domestically, it's tough. There are so many journalists, at least in the media world, who are being unemployed. When we launched our very small media platform 6 weeks ago, we received 200 job applications in the first 24 hours from across Afghanistan without announcing any vacancies. It was heartbreaking to see how many journalists have been laid off. How are they surviving? It's a tough question. Many of them were asking for very, very minimal payments. But at the same time, I was also pleased to see that there are journalists across Afghanistan who would like to use the power of pen and to tell the stories of their people. So you see the bright side of Afghanistan and the sad side of Afghanistan in the same story. I think that when I said our suffering defines us, one thing that unites all Afghans is our suffering and our pain. I don't think we have had an opportunity as a nation to sit in a circle, in a room, to share our pains and learn from each other and bond. I think that has been missing in the entire nation-building discourse of that country. So the situation is quite complex. But right now, I think what the country needs is emergency help. I'm not advocating for a solution. I don't have a solution, to be very honest with you, that how Afghanistan should be fixed long-term. I wish we had. In the vacuum, in the absence of having no solution, it would be disastrous. I'm warning against it. Disastrous to rush into another imposed solution.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Reza. I'm a newcomer. I just arrived like 6 months ago, like many Afghans who have been evacuated from Afghanistan. Thank you, Lotfullah, for great statements. I've enjoyed it. And you have been the voice of Afghanistan, the voice of people inside Afghanistan now after collapse of Afghanistan. You're the voice of people outside. And as you mentioned, you talked about strategic action. That's great. My question is, as a person who have been the voice of Afghan inside Afghanistan, you have been a journalist, you have challenged many officials, you have a good perspective about what's going on in Afghanistan. What do you think? Actually, you have mentioned some points, but what do you think, what are the prerequisites and requirements of peace building, considering this issue that we still have the challenge of nation building in Afghanistan? What do you think? Do you think that these international talks of ex-officials who have being held in different European countries or in many countries, do you think these are going to be a solution, or what are other options that, because people are still hoping, you know, it's not a small issue, it's a matter of 40 million people who are still living in a catastrophic, in a challenging environment, no job, no life, nothing else, no security, no school for women. Just want to hear, as a journalist, what do you think and what is your opinion about this? Thank you.
Thank you. I think national dialogue. We should start talking to each other. That's, when I talked about the peace process began on a serious note in 2018, until 2021, when the system fell. As an observer, as a journalist, I did not see people being part of that. It was an elite bargain. I think it's time for Afghanistan, when I concluded my remark by saying to reflect. By reflection, I mean we have to sit down for a national dialogue. And that national dialogue will hopefully guide us towards a particular direction that is needed for that country, first, to stick together, stay together, and second, we defined what defines us as people of Afghanistan, as Afghans. Even that is disputed. So we have to talk about that. I think we need platforms. I think that is probably responsibility of the diaspora, the very rich diaspora that we have right now. We didn't have it 20, 30 years ago. We had a lot of good Afghans who were even part of Afghanistan reconstruction and rebuilding in the past 20 years who came from abroad. But the number of Afghans who have left the country in the past year, I think it also comes with a responsibility on their shoulders that they have to facilitate some of these discussions. We genuinely need intra-Afghanistan or intra-Afghan dialogues. I think that is critical. And then we need to discuss politics, which comes second. What kind of political systems is going to work? I think the 50% plus one proved not to bring stability in that country. It never did. 60% of Afghans went to cast their votes in 2004. 60% of eligible voters. Highest turnout in that part of the world. Our first national elections. You have the numbers in 2019. It dropped down to less than 1 million, being very, very optimistic. Why? Because the political system did not necessarily produce. It was not a factor for stability. So we have to talk about that. I'm not saying, we shouldn't. I'm not saying what we had in Afghanistan was wrong. What I'm saying, it did not produce the result that we were expecting. It was not representative enough. I think some of these conversations are for Afghans to initiate and talk about it.
Good evening to all. My name is Mohammed Osman. I used to be an Afghan diplomat. I used to represent Afghanistan in New York, United States. But unfortunately, after August 15, not only I lost my dream to serve for my country, my career, I lost my country. And that was the sad moment of my whole life. I strongly believe that the only thing that Afghan elites and diaspora can do for their country is to advocating. I would like to have your recommendation and opinion in order to advocating. What's your expectation for Afghan elites and diaspora? What initiative needs to be done in order to advocate for Afghans? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've been very emotional, all of us, as a generation, as people of Afghanistan, and it's a difficult conversation. I personally find it quite difficult to talk about Afghanistan in the past year, more than, it's way more difficult than what it was for me before the fall of Kabul. I think we should try to set emotions aside first and engage in constructive dialogue. If we are going to achieve some consensus domestically among Afghans, I think it's important for us to see glass half full. It's almost impossible, I tell this to our international friends, to Canadian friends, it's almost impossible for Afghans to sit down and talk to each other. There is so much cloud of blame and fear and lack of trust in the air. that makes a conversation to, walk 2 meters. So I think we have to overcome that first.
Salam alaikum. Hi, my name is Sujida. Oh my God. Sajida. And I came here when I was 12 also as a refugee. Sorry. So I just heard that you talked. Sorry?
You should tell us what to do. Oh. We just arrived.
Yeah, so my question has different sections. I heard that you kept talking about having a dialect, and I just wanted to ask whether you believe that the reason why Afghanistan is such a vulnerable country for other nations to go in there and meddle into the country is because there is so much division between different ethnic groups in the country, and whether do you believe that that discussion should start by Afghans acknowledging that certain groups in Afghanistan have been more marginalized, have been more discriminated against. Just like in Canada, in order for the truth and reconciliation, we need to acknowledge that there was something happening to the indigenous people of Canada. And so I'm a Hazara from Afghanistan, and from my upbringing, I know that Hazara people were largely at a disadvantage within Afghanistan. But I've been in dialogues with other Afghans that has been completely ignored and shut down. And like you said, that doesn't allow for any conversation to happen. So I just want to know how would you suggest that conversation, that dialogue to even start if there is no acknowledgement?
Thank you. I think that's a very important question. I think we have to acknowledge our mistakes, and we have to acknowledge our history and what we have learned from history. As a minority, I also understand the pain that we went through, even in the good days of Afghanistan. As I said earlier, there were unwritten and undeclared laws that questioned the fundamental equality in the Afghan society. I think it's important to understand that, acknowledge that. It's important to understand that and acknowledge that, and then engage in a constructive discussion. But if our past is taking us hostage, not to engage, not to open up, then what are we really learning from our history? I think for us, including victim groups, including prosecuted minorities, I think it's important for us to engage with all Afghans, understanding what happened in the past, and working hard to make sure the future Afghanistan that we are going to build, if we are going to build, has no place for atrocities committed in our history.
Given the tenure of the talk, if there is any woman who wants to ask another final question, I leave it open to anyone who'd like to. Yeah, go ahead. I know you had your hand up earlier, so I'd like to.
Thank you so much for giving the opportunity. I'm so happy to be here. So we all know Mr. Najafi. I'm an Afghan woman judge, so I got here maybe 5 months ago, and I'm so happy to be here again with all of you. When you start talking, I felt like I'm talking, so it's a common pain. We all know what we are talking about, and I feel like all Afghans got emotional, just like me. there's lots of things, but I was so happy that you find a kind of solution for what we want for Afghanistan. There's lots of talks whenever people ask us, like in all like institutions we go or online sessions, they all ask us like, what is the future? So we feel like, is there a future for Afghanistan? It's something like I really doubt. And I got to this opinion the time I started writing and working on a paper. So I was a judge on domestic violence cases. I started working on a paper about the history of domestic violence. And when I started working on that, I felt very emotional on that time also. Because I felt like why this started, that my country has always had a domestic violence cases, from where women started being discriminated. And it was very far. Every time there was starting to be a stopping point for that, it was demolished back. So we are again over here. I experienced domestic violence cases like a lot, and I know what happened to my country. It's not like some provinces had like a high crime rate of domestic violence, but some provinces didn't. But that didn't mean that they didn't have crime rate. So it's all over the country, and it's just a small like problem of Afghanistan. But I really I just wanted to share my opinion, and I wanted to ask you, like, whenever you will be in other programs, other sessions, please focus more on education, because I got to know like that was the biggest mistake in Afghanistan, that it was always ignored. Because if it would be educated people all over, we wouldn't be here again. Like, it wouldn't happen. Because when you have education, you have more priorities, not just thinking about these down-to-earth problems. But thank you. Hope to be in this kind of like sessions again. Thank you so much.
Well, let me say that being a judge is a big deal everywhere, but being a judge in Afghanistan was something different. The Taliban were telling us and other groups in Doha that women cannot be three things in a future political sort of system in the country: president, imam, and judge. So you have been a hero, and I'm so happy you had a chance to speak, and thank you for coming. I have a lot of admiration for you. On education, I understand what it does to a society. I understand close up. I understand from my family. When girls stopped going to school, when Taliban were in power first time around, and their lives changed forever. In my family, and in so many other families. I know what 3 million girls who are not going to school today means to that society. It's very important, thank you for reminding, that we should advocate for their rights and for rights of all of us. And last, I'm very happy that we had some sort of a mini Afghan dialogue here today. So thank you for that, Megan and Nurjehan. I think it was important. I think the common theme of our discussion was our pain, was our past, was our curiosity for future, was our deep passion and love for Afghanistan. So it's important for us to continue this dialogue, and it's more work for Megan. Thank you.
Well, what a beautiful way to come to a close. Lotfullah, you said you didn't have the solution, but actually I think you've started to outline what sounds like a really wonderful path, starting with national dialogue, starting with the kind of dialogue that we're having this evening. So thank you all for being part of that. And also, I think it's wonderful that part of that solution that you've outlined is the role of free media and also of education. And there's no better place to discuss that, I think, than at Simon Fraser University. And so I'm delighted that we can facilitate that conversation. I do hope you all stay in touch. I'm so, just we're so pleased that you're here and also that you ask such generous questions. I know for many of you it is such a personal topic and such a personal journey, and so we appreciate that. Two of the words, the two R's I also heard was this resistance, to move away from this language of resilience, which assumes just this constant survival, to resistance, which is a much more active term. So thank you for that, Dr. Mawani. But also reflection. And so we wanted to end on a note of reflection. It's a very difficult, in some ways, to end. I think we ended nicely here, but I wanted to bring up Dr. Mawani to give us a special way to close out the evening. And afterwards, you're very welcome to enjoy more food, to stay and chat. Again, please stay connected to the school. If this is your first time at Simon Fraser University, if it's your first introduction to the School for International Studies or the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, please get in touch with us. We want you to be part of our community moving forward. So, Dr. Mawani.
So, when we started, I had spoken about the journalists who perished in that attack on the Tolo news team. And there's a young Afghan pianist named Arsan Fahim. Arsan Fahim composed almost right away this very moving, beautiful piece of music. He's a pianist. And he is now at the Langay School of Music in Boston. And he was 18 years old when this happened, and he composed this. So I asked him to share it with us. And I just want to say, I asked Arsan because we know him well. And in fact, you talked about the Afghan National Institute of Music. There had been an incident, and the music school was closed. And there was no way for them to practice, and we managed to find, bless you, we managed to find a place for them to play the piano, to practice. Anyway, so Arsan says, I said, so just remind us, because we are going to share it with this audience. And he said, I wrote it right after the twin bombings in 2018 that killed at least 9 journalists. They made the biggest sacrifice of all, their lives. Then he goes on to say, to me, this piece of music that he wrote is called Freedom, and that's what he plays on the piano. And he said, to me, freedom is about the sacrifice that journalists around the world, but especially in Afghanistan, have made to ensure that we have access and right to information, which is essential to any democracy and to any freedom. So we thought, Megan, Lotfullah, and I, that this might be a very special, poignant way of perhaps concluding our session today. So with your permission, Megan is going to play this, and I'm remembering Arsan at this time too.